Morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to another Bookish Breakfast. I don't really feel like I've got an awful lot to talk about this week because I haven't been doing an awful lot of reading. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that for the whole of March, April, May, like all of the worst times for working in coronavirus, I actually had a really nice rota, and like the shifts that I was working were pretty well spaced out. I was doing like maybe a set of 4 nights and then a few days off and things like that, where I had quite a lot of space and days off around the times that I'm working. And at the moment I've got the opposite, so I've got like a roster that's like 1 day on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off, and I just don't really have that much time. Like it feels like I'm constantly working or constantly just gathering my bearings ready for the next shift. And that leaves me with very little scope to just, oh, today I'm just going to sit down with a good book because I'm thinking, oh, but I've got to make sure I've washed my uniform, I've got to make sure I've made some packed lunches ready for the next couple of shifts and stuff. I just don't really have the kind of switch off kind of pattern. So yeah, that's affecting the time that I'm dedicating to reading. The other factor is, it's not a bad thing, but my partner is furloughed, so that means that while I am at home, he's always at home, and that means that we're more likely to do something together that's maybe more constructive, I say more constructive, it's either more constructive, like we're working on some projects in the house, or less constructive because we might just be watching something together rather than sitting and reading. So I don't really feel like I can say, oh, you know, and now I'm just going to read because we're together, so it makes sense to do stuff together. And then the other factor is there's just other interests that I have and other things that I'm doing instead. So I've been doing a lot of baking recently, particularly so that I've got nice snacks to take on all of these shifts that I'm constantly doing. Like I know that I'm not, but it feels like because I'm constantly 1 day on, 1 day off, I feel like I must be working more hours than I should be working, but I'm not. I don't know, those of you who've worked shifts before might know that kind of roster pattern that you get into where it just seems like it never ends and it's going to go right until the end of July, and I shouldn't complain because I had such a lovely set of rosters for the last few months, but yeah, struggling to adjust. And all of my days off, I'm spending quite a significant chunk of time in the garden because I'm really properly getting into gardening this year. And like last night we ate a meal that was basically based on things that I'd grown this year in the garden, which it's a really nice sense of achievement. I harvested like a bushel of spinach and we made it into like a spinachy stew thing that was really tasty. But yeah, it's weird because that's time that I might otherwise have been spending doing like inside the home things such as reading. But I feel like it's better for me and just better in general to have the variety of things going on and better to be spending some of that time doing something a bit more active. But yeah, it means that I'm not reading very much. So I feel like I said, I've not got very much to say in terms of stuff about books. But I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the things that I have been reading a tiny bit of this week. So I already spoke earlier this week about Rigoberta Menchú. I maybe read 1 or 2 more chapters. I think I've read 1 more chapter since then. And actually it's getting into a period where she's talking more about the organisation of her community in terms of they are experiencing, I was going to say illegal land grabs, but actually it was very much legal and supported by the government, where the Ladino landowners were trying to take over the land that had been cultivated by her community, and they as a community started to organise and get involved in sort of a wider political movement to try and protect their land. So that's getting quite interesting in terms of the historical point of view. Then I've also read a tiny bit more of the Odyssey. I feel like I spoke quite a bit about the Odyssey last week. I'm still really enjoying it. Yeah. That's the Odyssey. And then I've also spoken relatively frequently about The Stone Sky. I can't believe how long it's taking me to get through this, given that every time I read it, I do really enjoy it, apart from, I think I already mentioned that I struggle to remember what all the little bits and pieces are that have been mentioned in like previous books and stuff. I'm enjoying it, but I'm just not making any progress with it. But I'm on nights from now, and sometimes in the middle of the night when we have breaks, nobody really wants to speak, so it's a better time for getting a little bit of reading done. But yeah, I'm not even sure, like at the start of June I had, this is the thing that's bothering me, I suppose, not that Not that I'm not reading, but that I had so many plans for the things that I was going to read, and I thought I would read this in a couple of days, and it's taken me a couple of weeks. I don't even know if I'm going to finish it in June, whereas I just assumed that I would. And I feel like it's going to take me a while to get through when it shouldn't be the kind of book that does take a while to get through. So yeah, anyway, so that's the thing that's bothering me, was that I was like, oh, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read that, and I'm going to read the other, and I'm probably just going to read this. But yeah, it's good. It continues to be quite good. One thing I'd say is part of the Stone Sky and part of the Broken Earth series that gets a lot of attention is the style. And I noticed the other day when I was reading a little chunk that I've just completely tuned it out. And I kind of forgot that I was reading something that was written in the second person, and I was talking to somebody about it. I was like, oh yeah, it's got this interesting style, and then I was like, has she dropped that? Is she still writing in the second person? I can't remember. And I realised that somehow the more I read it, the less I noticed that she was writing in the second person. So I feel like it's a technique that actually isn't very effective, because the first couple of chapters you're just getting used to it, and it's so weird that you're just thinking, what's going on here? Why is she doing this? But then by the time you've got used to its weirdness, you stop actually noticing that it's happening, and you start just thinking of you as being almost like the name of the character, rather than as being like a way of addressing or bringing you into the story. So yeah, I just don't think that it works, that aspect of the style. But that's just my opinion. So the other two books I didn't talk about last week, so I thought I could spend a tiny bit longer talking about these. So I mentioned I bought this book a little while ago, Around the World in 80 Trains. It was a little treat for me when I was, during lockdown, I saw it advertised and I was like, oh, I'll just get that. So it's by Monisha Rajesh, and she is a writer who has previously written a book about travelling via trains around India, and now she is travelling around via train around the entire world, and she has got as far as Bangkok. I think they've just set out from Bangkok, starting in England and then going up through Europe, across Russia, down through China, via Hanoi, Bangkok, and that's that kind of thing. So one thing I really feel like this book could do with is some maps, because I don't know the geography of the planet off by heart, and I don't think most people do. Like, I have a rough idea, and I just would like to see how the train tracks map across the countries, because, you know, I know that Russia and China have a border, but I would like to see where on that border the train comes across, and like how it wiggles down to get to Beijing, and like what she's going past as she's going through this journey. And there's no maps. Please give me maps. I like maps in books. I'm very much my mother's daughter in that respect. Like, there's pictures, like, yay, nice pictures, but I'd honestly rather have a map. But maybe that's just me. I'm enjoying reading this. I read it. I have it by my bed, and I just read a little tiny chunk at bedtime every now and then. Not really every night, but sometimes. And sometimes I find myself wondering what she's actually writing about. So I've only read the very start, and yeah, she's writing about this train journey through a range of amazing countries, and yet sometimes it feels like she's writing about nothing at all. It's a good book, don't get me wrong, but she's not writing very much about the country she goes through. She's not writing very much about her personal experiences. She's not writing very much about the trains. And it just sometimes I think, what is she writing about? But I think she's writing a little bit about all of those things, and because she's trying to cover such a massive journey in such a tiny, tiny book, it all ends up being very, very condensed. So she'll spend a little while describing maybe the carriage that they get into, but then one page later they're off that train. So she's done this kind of like scene setting of they're sitting on these wooden boards and stuff, and people are staring at them because they're tourists. And then they're off the train and they've moved on. And I kind of just would rather maybe have a little bit more depth sometimes. Or for instance, they arrived at the border of Cambodia and discovered that there wasn't a railway there. Like, they just assumed there was going to be a functional railway, but there weren't any trains that would take them across Cambodia. And she spends about 2 pages explaining why there are no trains in Cambodia. That's really interesting and like a great historical perspective. That's the other thing, like there's not much in terms of historical or cultural background to the countries that she goes through. And then immediately she just says, we got buses across Cambodia. She doesn't tell you anything about the buses, anything about the landscape they went through. And like a journey on a chain of buses across Cambodia, that's got to be interesting. That's got to be worth saying something about. But she doesn't. And it's like she's assumed that because it's not a train, we're not going to be interested. But I'm interested. Yeah, so it's a little bit peculiar. And then maybe she'll have like a paragraph about the city that they're staying overnight in. But because they're only there for one night, there's just not much depth, I suppose, is the thing that I'm having issues with. I think I might have preferred her to maybe talk in depth a little bit more about separate incidents. The thing that I really like is, I'm trying to think what you call it, but you know when you're sat on a train and you overhear someone saying something really silly or really interesting, or you see a weird little interaction going on. She's great at that. I think it's like, it used to be a Guardian column or something. I remember reading it when I was a kid. It was called All Ears, I think, and it would just be a little overheard conversation. And she's really great at picking out little ones of those. But that's not the whole, you can't have a whole book that's just witnessing strangers on trains interacting. Like there needs to be a little bit more about the countries that she's going through. Like a little bit more description of the countryside, or a little bit more about why she finds that country interesting, or a little bit more about the sites that they go to see. Yeah, I feel like I didn't think it was going to be a book that was just about train travel. I thought there was going to be a bit more to it, but maybe there isn't. But I would still rate it pretty well and recommend it for somebody who was interested in round the world travel, I suppose, maybe. It definitely, I'm very envious of her amazing adventure. I would love to have such an amazing adventure. The other thing that I wanted to say is she's just sometimes slightly snobby, and not in a posh way, but in a way that, I mean, I can empathise with it, because you know when I suppose it's like when somebody, yeah, how do I say this? So all other travellers aren't as good at travelling as her and her partner, is the impression that I get. And I think that's, a lot of travellers kind of fall into that. Like if you go on some kind of amazing trip, your trip is obviously the best trip that it's possible to have and that anyone could have, and you're obviously doing it right and you're doing it the best way. And that's the impression that she sometimes gives off. And I do think she's doing it in a really good way, and I do think her and her partner are getting on really well with their trip. That's the other thing, sometimes I forget that she's travelling with her partner. Like he barely gets a mention, and I feel like their relationship must have been impacted by lying in trains together for miles and miles and miles. Like they must have had some kind of arguments or discussions or disagreements or something. But anyway, yeah, he barely figures. But like if they get to Thailand and she's really snooty about all of the drunk British gap year students there, and I probably would be too. Like I feel like that's not really the right way to go and experience a country, to very destructively go and get pissed there, and yeah, to have no real respect for the culture. But it's interesting how freely she criticises other people in this book. Yeah, so that was my view on this one, and I'll continue to talk about it as I, very, very slowly read the rest of it. And then the final book that I've been reading is Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood. So I'm reading this one as an audiobook. I have been for probably about 2 months now, definitely for a very long time. This is a reread for me. I read it when I was about 18, and I honestly had completely forgotten a huge amount of it. I remembered that the main character had a girlfriend who went to stay in a beautiful place in the mountains while she recovered from a sort of mental breakdown. But I had forgotten everything else, and I was quite amused and alarmed by the vast quantities of sex in this book. Like, this is not a PG-13 book. And it's bothering me, because I'll be honest, I'm quite quite a prude when it comes to books. I don't need to know the details. Like, I don't mind them saying that a character is promiscuous, but I don't really want to know that much about it. But I feel like it's got to mean something, and I would appeal to you, if you are a reader of Murakami, please tell me what this means. Because I feel like this book is full of symbolism, it's full of allusion, there's constant mentions of, you know, things that he's reading or things that he's listening to. I mean, like, obviously the title is a Beatles song, and I feel like it's very embedded in the sort of, I think it's 1960s, like, embedded in the 1960s, like, cultural changes that were going on. And yeah, I just want to know what it means, because I feel like it's got to mean something. Because other than that, if not, it's just basically porn in literary book form. But it's weird. Like, it goes from talking about, like, in a chapter recently, it goes from talking about the hypocrisy of Marxist student groups to the shortness of a female character's skirt, and, like, including a neurosurgeon who's looking after her sick dad starts talking about how her skirt is going to cause people to, you know, have accidents and stuff. Like, really quite strange, to talking about going to watch porn movies, to like, debating what quality of life is like with advanced brain cancer, and all of those things just get mushed together into one chapter, and it feels like there's so many themes and so many things under consideration that it's got to be good, but I feel like I just don't quite get it. So if you do get it, please let me know, and I will appreciate it more. I do find it interesting that mental health is obviously a huge topic, but the physical health conditions that are covered as well are related to, like, this this character's dad has got a brain tumour, and her mother also had a brain tumour. So it's very much about the mind and the health of the space inside your head, is what I'm tentatively proposing from that arrangement of coincidences. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. But I know that I liked it when I was 18, but maybe 18-year-old me had different views on things. I don't know. I can't really think of anything else that I've been reading, but I hope you're all well, and thanks for listening. And even though I said I had not much to say, I realised that I've gone on for 18 minutes. So, yeah, sorry for being a bit boring. Okay, take care.